Chapter 20. The Palatines on the Continent. Rupert's disputes with the Elector. The Elector's anxiety for Rupert's return. One of an heir to the Palatinate. Francisca Bard. Rupert's children. The oath which Rupert had sworn in 1658, he faithfully kept. Never again, in spite of changed circumstances, and the earnest entreaties of his family, did he set foot in the Palatinate. Yet he was not quite forgotten by his relatives. The lively and voluminous correspondence of Sophie and the Elector, from which we learn much of all family affairs, contains many allusions to mon frère Rupert, in whose sayings and doings the brother and sister took a keen interest. Sophie had been married, October 17, 1658, to Ernest Augustus of Brunswick, one of the Dukes of Hanover, and titular Bishop of Osnabrück. In her new home she was visited by Rupert, September 1660, and she wrote of the visit to Charles Louis, as most satisfactory. "My brother Rupert made a great friendship with my dukes," she said, "they agree so very well in their amusements." Since Sophie's dukes were devoted to music and to hunting, it may easily be understood that Rupert's tastes accorded well with theirs. Sophie wrote dukes advisedly, for she had practically married, not only Ernest Augustus, but his elder brother, George William. These two were even more inseparable than Rupert and Maurice had been, and their mutual affection caused considerable annoyance to the unfortunate Sophie. She had been first betrothed to the elder of the two, but George William, being seized with a panic that marriage would bore him horribly, had persuaded his devoted brother Ernest to take the lady off his hands. Sophie acquiesced placidly in the arrangement. She desired chiefly to secure a good establishment, and if she had any preference, it was for the younger brother. But she was not allowed to keep her husband to herself. Neither brother could bear the other out of his sight, and when constant intercourse with his sister-in-law had roused George William's regret for his hasty rejection of her, the position of Sophie became exceedingly difficult. Worse still, her husband was possessed with so ardent an admiration for his brother as to fancy that everyone else must adore him as he did, and this idea kept him in a terror of losing his wife's affections. As he would endure separation from neither wife nor brother, there was no remedy, and for months the hapless Sophie was led in to dinner by George William, without ever daring to raise her eyes to his face. Luckily for her the strain became too much at last, even for Ernest Augustus, and he consented to take an 18-month tour in Italy with his brother, leaving his wife to visit her own relations in peace. The eldest sister, the learned Elizabeth, had devoted herself, like Louise, to a religious life, and became first coadjutress, and afterwards abbess of the Lutheran convent of Herverden. In this capacity she governed a territory of many miles in circumference, and containing a population of 7,000. She was recognized as a member of the empire, had a right to send a representative to the Diet, and was required to furnish 1 horseman and 6-foot soldiers to the imperial army. Every Saturday she might be seen gravely knitting in the courtyard of her castle, while she adjudged the causes brought for her decision. For some reason or other she and her religious views were a subject of great mirth to her brothers and sisters. Rupert visited her more than once in 1660 and 1661, but, said Sophie, "Il se rail beaucoup de la signora grecque." And Sophie herself usually alluded to her eldest sister with mild amusement, Charles Louis with evident irritation. Louise seems really to have been the happiest of all the family, and to have lived with true contentment in her convent of Maubuisson. Sophie, who had the joy of visiting her there in 1679, wrote to the Elector, "She has not changed. I find her very happy, for she lives in a beautiful place. Her garden is large and very pleasant, which is one of the things I love best in the world." In her next letter she remarked that Louise was very regular in her observance of convent rules, which makes her pass for a saint. And she added, with a little sigh of envy for the peace she witnessed, "I could easily accommodate myself to a life like that." But the reply of Charles Louis was satirical and unsympathetic. "I know not if I dare ask you to make my very devoted baisemains to my sister the abbess of Maubuisson, provided that the offering of my profane lips, which still smack somewhat of the world, does not offend her abstracted thoughts. And that she can still spare some for her carnal brother, who is now only skin and bones. At least, I am always grateful that she asks of me nothing mundane. Louise lived to a cheerful and healthful old age, retaining to the last her interest in art. Her own chapel and many neighboring churches were beautified by the productions of her brush, and in 1699, when she had reached the age of 77, she was painting a copy of Poussin's Golden Calf, as a gift for Sophie. Her life was simple but peaceful. She ate no meat, slept on a bed as hard as a stone, sat only on a straw stool, and rose always at midnight to attend chapel. Yet she was never ill, nor did she ever lose her high spirits. She is better tempered, more lively, sees, hears and walks better than I do, wrote her niece Elizabeth Charlotte, the daughter of Charles Louis, when Louise was 80. She is still able to read the smallest print without spectacles, has all her teeth complete, and is quite full of fun, popierlic, like my father when he was in a good humor. Elizabeth Charlotte had been married to Philip of Orleans, the quondam husband of her fair cousin, Henrietta Stuart, and Louise was her chief consolation in an exceedingly unhappy life. One cannot believe how pleasant and playful the Princess of Maubuissin was, she said. I always visited her with pleasure, no moment could seem tedious in her company. I was in greater favor with her than her other nieces, Edward's daughters, because I could converse with her about everything she had gone through in her life, which the others could not. She often talked to me in German, which she spoke very well. She told me her comical tales. I asked her how she had been able to habituate herself to a stupid cloister life. She laughed, and said, I never speak to the nuns, except to communicate my orders. She said she had always liked a country life, and fancied she lived like a country girl. I said, but to get up in the night and to go to church. She answered, laughing, that I knew well what painters were, they liked to see dark places and the shadows caused by lights, and this gave her every day fresh taste for painting. She could turn everything in this way, that it should not seem dull. But in spite of her flippant speeches, Louise was respected by all who knew her, adored in her own convent, and died in the odor of sanctity, attesting to the end her staunch adherence to the Jacobite cause. Edward, with whom Rupert had more intercourse than with the other members of his family, died young, 3 years after the Restoration, and thus Rupert was left alone in England. Occasionally he wrote to his sisters, but not very often. If you knew how much joy your letters give me, I am sure you would have the good nature to let me receive them oftener than you do, declared Elizabeth. And Sophie complained likewise, it is so long since I have heard from Rupert that I do not know if he is still alive. With Elizabeth, Rupert had a common ground in the contests they both waged with Timon, the elector. Timon is so finely vexed at the 6,000 rix dollars he has to pay me, out of a clear debt, that he will not send me my annuity, declared Elizabeth in 1665. Rupert's own quarrels with Timon were more bitter. The unsettled dispute about the uppunnage had been aggravated by the struggle over their mother's will. The Queen had threatened, in her wrath, to bequeath her unsatisfied claims on the elector to his brothers. This she had not done, but she had made Rupert her residuary legatee, leaving to him most of her jewels. The elector, as we have seen, denied his mother's right to do this. Rupert refused to give up his legacy, and for years the sordid dispute dragged on. In 1661 the elector offered a sum of money in lieu of all Rupert's claims upon him. But the offer was rejected with scorn. The elector professed himself much injured, and Sophie, who sided entirely with her eldest brother, wrote consolingly, Rupert does not do you much harm by rejecting your money. Next Charles Louis tried to put his brother off by assigning to him a debt which he pretended due to him from France, but neither would this satisfy Rupert. Give me leave to tell you, he wrote to Arlington in 1664, that the debt my brother pretends from France is a mere chimera. It was Moni's promise to Prince John Casimir to go back with his army out of France, which, you will find, is not intended to be paid yet. As I assured His Majesty, I remit the whole business to him to dispose, and have given my Lord Craven order to satisfy His Majesty and yourself in all which shall be desired, in order to it. So you may easily believe I shall embrace most willingly the offers you made unto me, assuring you that I shall repay the favor by possible means I can. But the mediation of Charles II did not bring matters to a peaceful end, and Rupert seems to have sought accommodation through Sophie. It seems to me that Rupert never remembers my existence, except when he thinks of being reconciled with you, declared that lady to the elector. Nevertheless, she did her best to produce the reconciliation. "I am very glad that you are anxious to do all you can to content Rupert," she wrote to her eldest brother. "I do not doubt he will be reasonable on his side, and that he will consider your present position, since he expresses a desire to be friends with you." And in the next year, 1668, she was still hopeful. "I hope Rupert will be contented with what you offer him, for he seems to be in a very good temper." But, in spite of Rupert's good temper, the affair was not concluded, and in 1669, even the indolent Charles II was roused to pen an expostulatory letter to Charles Louis, with his own hand. "Most dear cousin, it is well known to you that I have always expressed myself very much concerned for the differences that have been between you and my cousin, Prince Rupert, and that I have not been wanting, in my endeavor to bring them to a good conclusion, and how unsuccessful I have been therein. But, being still desirous thereof, I cannot but continue my interposition, and, upon a due consideration of both sides, and very tenderly the state of your own affairs, I have thought fit to offer yet one more expedient towards the accommodating of the matter, which is this, that my cousin Rupert shall disclaim and discharge you from all arrears of uppunnage due unto him by a former agreement, which, according to your own computation, as I am informed, by this time, amounted above the sum of £6,000 sterling. He shall also lay down all his pretensions as executor to the late Queen, my aunt, contenting himself only with the movables in his possession, which belong to the Palatinate house, and £300 sterling. By the year, if he have no lawful issue, ad durum vitae, the first payment to be made forthwith, and the subsequent allowances at Easter fair at Frankfurt. The one half of which sum, if contented, to be obligated to lay out in commodities and wines of the growth of your country. And that you may have a more particular account of this last proposition, and the reasons inducing to it, I have thought fit to send unto you the bearer, James Hayes, Esq., my cousin Rupert's secretary, as being best acquainted with this affair. To whom I desire you to give credence in this matter, and conjuring you to give him such a dispatch as may finally dethrone this unhappy controversy. Wherein, if ye shall comply with my desire, ye shall give me a great satisfaction. But if otherwise, you must excuse me, if I use my utmost interest for the obtaining of that to my cousin, which I conceive so justly belongs to him. I am, with all truth, most dear cousin, your most affectionate cousin, Charles R. March 31st, 69. This letter does considerable credit to Charles's business capacities, but even so modest a settlement as he proposed was refused. Nor did the interference of Louis XIV of France, in July 1670, produce any better result. As to the letter of the King of France about Rupert, I think it is easy to answer with very humble thanks, neither accepting nor declining his mediation, advised Sophie. But Rupert's revenge was not long deferred. About 5 years later the Elector found cause to repent his ill usage of his obstinate brother, and would have given much to recall him to the home of his fathers. The scandals rife at the court of Heidelberg, in 1658, had by no means abated after Rupert's withdrawal. The dissensions of the Elector and Electress became a subject of public remark, and the Queen of Bohemia had herself written of them to Rupert, adding prudently, "I do not tell you this for truth, for it is written from the court of Cassel, where, I confess, they are very good at telling of stories, and enlarging of them. But, unluckily, matters were so bad that no embellishments from the court of Cassel could make them much worse. The scandal, accidents fallen out in my domestic affairs," Charles Louis phrased it, had come to such a pitch that the Electress, after boxing her husband's ears at a public dinner, and attempting to shoot both him and Louise von Degenfeld, fled from Heidelberg, leaving her 2 young children, Karl and Elizabeth Charlotte, or Kareli and Lieselotte, as their father called them, to the mercy of her husband. Thereupon Charles Louis formally married Louise von Degenfeld, who was thenceforth treated as his wife. By her he had no less than 8 children, but as the marriage was not, of course, really legal, none of those children could succeed him in the electorate. Kareli, his only legitimate son, was delicate, and his marriage childless. Elizabeth Charlotte had renounced all claim to the Palatinate on her marriage with the Duke of Orleans, and in 1674 the extinction of the Cimmern line seemed imminent. This danger affected Charles Louis very deeply. He had been a bad son, an unkind brother, and an unfaithful husband, but he was, for all that, a good ruler and an affectionate father. The Regenerator, he was called in the war-wasted country to which his laborious care had brought peace and comparative prosperity, and his name was long remembered there with reverent love. The prospect of leaving his cherished country and his beloved children to the mercy of a distant and Roman Catholic cousin, caused him acute suffering. Nor did he believe the said children would be much better off in the care of their eldest brother and his wife. What devours my heart is that, in case of my death, I leave so many poor innocents to the mercy of their enemies, he wrote to Sophie. Wilhelmina, the wife of Carelli, shows sufficiently what I may expect of her for those who will be under her power after my death, since, particularly in company, she shows so much contempt for them. This also has some influence on Carelli, who treats them, with the exception of Karl Lutz, like so many strangers, as does Wilhelmina. The poor little ones are always in fear of her severe countenance. With this depressing prospect before him, Charles Louis turned his thoughts to his neglected brother, showing his confidence in Rupert's generosity, by his readiness to entrust him with the care of his children. George William says that the Prince Rupert ought to marry, wrote Sophie, quoting her troublesome brother-in-law, in January 1674. Such was the opinion of the now regretful elector, and he pressed his brother to return, promising to grant him all he could desire, if he would but come and raise up heirs to the house of Simmern. But Rupert remembered his oath, and answered as we have seen in a former chapter. Then Sophie tried her powers of persuasion, and bade Lord Craven tell Rupert how much the elector would be pleased, if he would but yield. But Lord Craven showed himself, for once, severely practical. If Sophie would name to him some very rich lady willing to marry Rupert, he would be delighted to negotiate the matter, he said. If not, then he begged to be excused from interference. And there I am stuck, je suis demeure, confessed Sophie, for I do not know how he would support her. Nevertheless the family continued their solicitations, to which Rupert next retorted that the elector had better get his cousin, the Elector of Brandenburg, and his sister Elizabeth to persuade Charlotte of Hesse to agree to a divorce. When, Louise being dead, he could marry again. He must either be very ignorant of our intrigues here, or wishes to appear so, wrote the elector bitterly. He knew that Charlotte would never forego her vengeance by setting him free, and that neither his cousin nor his sister would interfere in such an affair. Elizabeth was, however, so far pressed into the service, that she, in her turn, exhorted Rupert to come over and marry. To her he only replied, that he was quite comfortable at Windsor, and had no intention of moving. That Charles Louis had insulted him and might do what he pleased for an heir, he should not have him. Such was his final word, and consequently the Palatinate passed, on the death of Carelli in 1685, to the Neuburg branch of the family. Charles Louis died in 1680, and Rupert did not cherish the enmity he had borne him beyond the grave. On the contrary, he was anxious to do what he could for the benefit of his impecunious nephews and nieces. For Carelli he did not care. The young elector had offended him by his neglect, but it was not Carelli who needed his protection. It was rather against Carelli that he took up the cause of the Raugrafen, as Charles Louis's children by Louise were called. The circumstances of the case had left them completely dependent on their eldest brother, who bore them no great love. This was not due to the fact that their mother had supplanted his own. Carelli had never loved his mother. He had often told his father that he paid no heed to what Charlotte might say, and had himself urged her to consent to a divorce. But he was of a peculiar temperament, jealous, fretful, difficult, and his dislike of the Raugrafen was really due, partly to the influence of his disagreeable wife, and partly to jealousy of the affection which his father had always shown to them. Especially to Mauritian, poor Mauritian, gifted with all the Palatine fascination and brilliancy, but ruined by a life of uninterrupted indulgence, so that he drank himself to death. Promises of providing for these cadets had been wrung from Carelli by his anxious father, but these promises he showed himself in no haste to keep, and Sophie appealed, on their behalf to Rupert. He showed himself ready to assist them, and demanded a concise account of the whole business, in order that he might be qualified to interfere. Not that he thinks the elector will break his sacred promise to his father, declared Sophie. Nevertheless she urged the eldest Raugraf, Karl Ludwig, or Karl Lutz, who had shortly before visited Rupert in England, to write very affectionately to his uncle, in gratitude for the interest shown in them. But, unfortunately for the Raugrafen, Rupert did not long survive his brother, and only a few months later Sophie wrote to one of her nieces, "You have lost a great friend in my brother Prince Rupert. I am very much troubled and overwhelmed with the unexpected loss. I know the Electress Dowager will also bewail him." Considering that for more than 20 years Sophie had not seen her brother, her grief seems a little excessive, but doubtless she lamented him for many reasons. The memory of old days dwelt with her all the more as she advanced in years, and latterly she had drawn nearer to her brother. By his means a marriage had been projected between Sophie's eldest son George and the Princess Anne, the second daughter of the Duke of York. During the progress of this negotiation, Sophie sent George over to England, on a visit to his uncle. She had some misgivings about his reception, for, as she confessed, George was not, as says Beau, to resemble a Palatine in any way, though her second son Friedrich, or Gustien, as she called him, was tall and handsome. The very image of Rupert tout crash. Gustien had, moreover, not only Rupert's handsome face and gigantic stature, but also his resolute character. If he would have changed his religion, he might have succeeded well at the imperial court, wrote his mother. But he has too much of his uncle Rupert not to be firm in his religion. However, George, if less favored by nature, was still the eldest son, and therefore of necessity the bridegroom-elect. Notwithstanding his want of good looks he was very kindly received, both by King Charles and Rupert. The king declared that he would treat him en cousin, and lodged him in Whitehall. Rupert paid him daily visits when his health allowed of it, but he was very ill, and often confined to his bed. "I went to visit Prince Rupert, who received me in bed," wrote George to his mother. "He has a malady in his leg, which makes him very often keep his bed. It appears that it is so, without any pretext, and that he has to take care of himself. He had not failed one day of coming to see me." But though entertained with extraordinary magnificence, the Hanoverian was not favorably impressed with either England or the Princess Anne. The country was in a ferment over the alleged discovery of the Popish plot, and George regarded the judicial murders then perpetrated with astonished disgust. "They cut off the head of Lord Stafford yesterday, and made no more ado than if they had chopped off the head of a pullet," he told his mother. But notwithstanding the averseness of the intended bridegroom, the project was not at once renounced. And Rupert's last letter to Sophie, written shortly before his death, contained definite proposals on the subject. "En ma dernière, cher sir, je vous ai informé que cette poste je pourrai dire plus de nouvelles assures de l'affaire en question. Sachas done, en peu de mots, on offer 40,000 livres sterling. Assign caution marchand, et 10,000 livres sterling. Parent, durant la vie de le duc, votre mari. Et on sujet que donneres liberté votre fils de demeurer quelques temps en ce pays là, fin d'apprendre la langue, et faire connaître au peuple, ce qu'on trouve nécessaire en tout cas. Voies ce que j'ai ordre de vous dire, et de demander une réponse pour savoir si l'affaire vous agrée, si vous avez pour agréable, quel en face Illinois sera nécessaire que le duc m'envoie un homme d'affaires, avec ses instructions, et ses assures que sera bien, de celui que est à vous, Rupert. Il faut vous dire si one foot affaire si fait ou non vous avez fort grande obligation à la duchesse de Portsmouth. Elle vous assure de toutes ses services en cette affaire." Apparently the offered terms were not acceptable to the Hanoverians, for the negotiation closed with Rupert's death. Rupert died, to all appearance, unmarried, but he left 2 children, a son and a daughter. More than once he had seriously contemplated matrimony. In 1653 it had been rumored that he was about to wed his cousin Mary, the Princess Royal, widow of the Prince of Orange. In 1664 he made proposals for a royal lady of France, but the said lady objected that he had been too long and too deeply attached to a certain duchess. That obstacle was removed in the same year by the Duchess of Richmond's clandestine love match with Thomas Howard, but the French lady was long in coming to a decision, and in the meantime the young Francesca Bard crossed Rupert's path. Francesca was the eldest daughter of Sir Henry Bard, one of the Wilder Cavaliers, who had been raised to the Irish peerage as Viscount Bellamont, the same who had pleaded so earnestly with Rupert for Windibank's life in 1645. He had died during the exile, when on a mission to Persia, and Francesca, on the death of her only brother, assumed the family title, as Lady Bellamont. Except a title her father had nothing to bequeath, and it was probably the urgent petitions for the relief of their poverty, addressed by the family to the king, that first brought Francesca into contact with Rupert. The prince loved Francesca Bard, renounced his French alliance, and thenceforth turned a deaf ear to all entreaties that he would marry. A son was born to him, and christened Dudley. Rupert seems to have cared for the boy, and he certainly conducted his education with anxious solicitude. He sent him first to school at Eton, where he could himself watch over him from Windsor. At Eton the boy was distinguished for his gentleness of temper, and at the amiableness of his behavior, characteristics which he certainly did not inherit from his father. Nevertheless he had Rupert's martial spirit, and like his father before him, he early showed an aversion to study, and a passion for arms. Rupert, observing this and remembering his own boyhood, removed his son from Eton and placed him under the care of Sir Jonas Moore at the Tower, in order that he might receive instructions in mathematics and other subjects necessary for a military profession. To Dudley, at his death, the prince left his house and estate at Renan, the debts still due to him from the emperor, from the Elector Palatine, and from all persons not natural-born subjects of England. The English debts, which were considerably less, he destined to be divided amongst his servants. Der armer Dudley, as his Aunt Sophie called him, went to Germany to secure his property, and was received with great kindness by the Palatines, though there was a difficulty about the house at Renan, that being entailed property. In 1685 he was back again in England, fighting loyally for King James, as his father would have approved. In the Battle of Norton-on-Sea, Philip, where Monmouth fought an indecisive battle with Grafton, Churchill and Feversham, we find Captain Rupert, the prince's son, in command of the musketeers, and playing a prominent part. But when the rebellion had been suppressed, Dudley returned to Germany, seeking employment in the wars waged by the Empire against the Turks. He had all his father's active spirit and dauntless courage, but he had not also his enchanted life. In August 1686 young Dudley fell, in a desperate attempt made by some English volunteers to scale the walls of Buda. His death is mentioned with deep regret in several contemporary letters and diaries. Though so young, he was only 19, he had already become famous for his valor, and exceedingly popular on account of his lovable character. Many believed him to have been Rupert's lawful son, and there seemed to have been some grounds for the belief. He was universally known as Dudley Rupert, and his mother maintained to the end of her days that she had been Rupert's wife. Her claim was practically acknowledged in Germany, where morganatic marriages were already in fashion, and even in England rumors of it were rife. Some say Prince Rupert, in his last sickness, owned his marriage, says a letter in the Verney correspondence. If so, his son is next heir, after him, to the Palsgrave. But no public acknowledgement ever took place, and Rupert styled the boy in his will, Dudley Bard. On the other hand, he bequeathed to him property entailed on heirs male, and the emperor actually paid to Francesca, after her son's death, the sum of 20,000 crowns which he had owed to Rupert. It seems possible that there was some kind of marriage, but that such marriages were of rather doubtful legality. It could not have given Dudley royal rank, and hardly even a claim to the Palatinate, for, had such a claim existed, Rupert would certainly have put his son forward when the house of Cimmern was crying out for an heir. His niece, Elizabeth Charlotte of Orleans, declared that he had deceived Francesca with a false marriage. But the good Duchess was notoriously ignorant of her uncle's affairs, and added to her story several impossible circumstances which tend to discredit it, asserting, among other things, that Rupert had been lodging at the time, in Henry Bard's house, though Bard had been dead nearly 10 years. Moreover, such treachery is at variance with Rupert's whole character and all his known actions, and, though he cannot be said to have treated Francesca well, he may at least be acquitted of the baseness suggested by his niece. During Rupert's lifetime no mention is made of Francesca in letters or papers, public or private. Yet, after his death, we find frequent reference to her as to a well-known personage. Two reasons for her retirement suggest themselves. In the first place she was, as she herself asserted, too virtuous to care to have any dealings with the corrupt court, and in the second place she was a devout Roman Catholic. Considering the prevalent horror of popery, the fanatical agitation concerning the second marriage of the Duke of York, and Rupert's position as the popular hero, it may be that Francesca's religion made him unwilling to bring her forward publicly. But, be the exact facts of his connection with her what they may, that bond was probably the true reason for his obdurate refusal to hear of any other marriage. The later history of Francesca is sufficiently curious. In consequence of her own avoidance of the court, she had no powerful friends in England, and on Rupert's death, she sought refuge with his sister Sophie. The kindly electress received her as a sister, though she quite realized the difficulty of proving her right to the name. "She says she was married to my brother," wrote Sophie, "but it will be very difficult to prove. And because she has always behaved herself honorably, she has no friends at court." Of Dudley his aunt wrote as "the noble Dudley Rupert," and she actively assisted him to make good his claims to the property left him by his father. After his death she endeavored to get his possessions transferred to his mother, and wrote on the subject both to James II and to Lord Craven. "It will help her to enter a convent," she said, "for the poor woman will be inconsolable." But the lively Irish woman, devout though she was, had no taste for the cloister, and preferred to remain at Sophie's court, where she was greatly beloved. "She is an upright, good and virtuous woman, there are few like her, we all love her," declared the electress. In a later letter she refers to the lively wit of Francesca, who makes us all laugh. Evidently she accompanied Sophie on her visits to other potentates, and by William III she was accorded almost royal rank. In 1700 she went with Sophie to visit him at his palace at Loo, and was there admitted to the royal table. The king ate in the back stairs, without an armchair, with only the two electresses, the princess, and the Irish lady, Francesca, the electoral prince, and the Prince of Hesse, says an Englishman, writing to a friend. The rest of the company dined at the other tables below. After the English Revolution of 1688 Francesca became a staunch and active Jacobite. She made no secret of her views, and even stimulated Sophie's own sympathy for her exiled relatives. The envoys of William III and of Queen Anne inveighed bitterly against one Madame Bellamont, a noted lady, who is in favor with the electress, has been her chief confidant, and to her all the discontented politicians address themselves. Papists and sectaries. She is of the former communion, and I may safely say she is one of the most silly creatures that ever was born and bred in it, to say nothing of the scandal her person hath so justly deserved. The same writer asserted that Francesca was the only person who could speak English at the electoral court, and frequent references to her are found in the dispatches of himself and his successor. "A lady whom they call ye Lady Bellamont," says one, "whose character ye well know already. She was mistress, and she pretends married, to Prince Rupert, and as she is a zealous Roman Catholic so she seems to be a faithful friend to the court of St. Germain's, but is nevertheless used here with much kindness and civility." In 1708 Francesca undertook a journey to France on Jacobite business, but, opposed though her actions were to Sophie's interests, they could not diminish that lady's love for her. The electress, declared the enraged English envoys, was as much enamored as her brother had been. And so she remained until Francesca's death in August 1708, when she wrote mournfully to one of her nieces, "I have lost my good, honorable, charitable Madame Bellamont." Strange enough was the position of the Jacobite lady in the Hanoverian court, but the situation was rendered yet more complicated by the presence of Rupert's daughter, Ruperta, as the wife of Brigadier General Emmanuel Scrope Howe, William III's envoy extraordinary to the most serene house of Brunswick-Lunenburg. The mother of Ruperta was a far less reputable person than was Francesca Bard. Rupert had, as we have seen, kept himself apart from much of the wickedness of Charles II's court, but in the summer of 1668 he was unhappily persuaded to accompany his cousin to Tunbridge Wells. There he fell a victim to the charms of the actress, Margaret Hughes. This woman obtained considerable influence over him, and he purchased for her a house at Hammersmith. Also he left to her and his daughter, in equal shares, all that remained of his personal property, after the claims of Dudley and his servants had been satisfied. This, when all had been realized, amounted to about £6,000 each. Not an extravagant provision, but then Rupert did not die rich. Occasional mention of Mrs. Hughes is found in contemporary letters. In 1670 her brother, who was in Rupert's service, was killed by one of the king's servants, in a dispute over the rival charms of Peg Hughes and Nell Gwynn. A little later, Sophie informed the elector that the woman was in high favor at Windsor, and would, she feared, get possession of the Queen of Bohemia's jewels. Ein jeder seiner Weise gefällt, she concluded sarcastically. In another letter she wrote that the Danish ambassador thought Mrs. Hughes very modest. I was going to say the most modest of the court, but that would be no great praise. She seems, however, to have put slight faith in the assurance, for she earnestly desired Ruperta's marriage, on the grounds that she could get no good from her mother. It was said that Rupert, when dying, had sent his garter to the king, with the request that it, together with the hand of Ruperta, might be bestowed on Charles's son, Lord Burford. With this request the king did not comply. And about 1696 Ruperta married Emmanuel Howe, son of Mr. John Howe of Longar, in Nottinghamshire. For some time the marriage was kept a secret, for Howe feared the displeasure of the then king, William III. At last, just before his departure to Hanover, he permitted the Duke of Albemarle to break the news to the king. William was pleased to be gracious, and even recommended Ruperta to Sophie's notice, saying, "She is very modest, and lives like an angel with her husband." The husband in question met with Sophie's approval, for she thought him a fine man, rich, and in a good position. With Francesca he had a double cause of enmity, both public and private, and he wrote of her as virulently as his predecessors had done, declaring that she has done her endeavors continually to cross my transactions here for the Queen's service. And again, she is indeed a very simple creature, but as malicious and violent as is possible for anything to be. Nevertheless the large-hearted electress made her niece almost as welcome as she had made her reputed sister-in-law, and the Jacobite intrigante and the Orange ambassadress, both so closely connected with Rupert, seemed to have contrived to reside in comparative peace, under the protection of the mother of the House of Hanover. But for the bar sinister the claim of Ruperta to the English throne would have preceded that of Sophie's son, George I. It has sometimes been regretted that Rupert left no legitimate child who might have reigned in George's stead. But it may be safely conjectured that the fact would not have been a subject of regret with Rupert himself. He would have been the last person to wish that any child of his should supplant the House of Stuart, which he had so long and so faithfully served. Honest in all his dealings, faithful to his friends, and unswervingly loyal to his king he had ever been, and in his old age he would not have turned traitor. Loyalty and strength were the keynotes of his character. Never did he break his given word, with friend and foe alike he scrupulously kept faith, and whatsoever he found to do, he did it with all his might. In all things he had the courage of his opinions. And the rigid temperance which he practiced from his earliest youth, in an age and a country where drinking was almost universal, shows an unusual independence of character, and an unusual degree of self-respect. His private life, if judged by the standard of the present day, was far from virtuous, but it was virtue itself when compared with the practice of those who were his daily associates. His exceptional powers of mind raised him above the ordinary intellectual level, his personal valor surpassed all common courage. But, if his talents and virtues were in the superlative degree, so also were his failings. His consciousness of his own powers made him overconfident, impatient of advice, intolerant of contradiction. His jealous pride rendered him incapable of filling the second place. With advancing years these faults were somewhat amended, for Rupert was too wise not to profit by experience. But, as his hot temper and youthful insolence had won him the hatred of Charles's courtiers, so his cold cynicism and haughty disdain made him detested of the court of Charles II. In the coarse and witty memoirs of that brilliant court, Rupert passes without notice, or with only an occasional satirical reference. One noble writer, Anthony Hamilton, has, however, left a description of him, which, though written in prejudice, is not without its value. He was brave and courageous to rashness, but cross-grained, and incorrigibly obstinate. His genius was fertile in mathematical experiments, and he had some knowledge of chemistry. He was polite to extravagance when there was no occasion for it, but haughty and rude where it was his interest to conciliate. He was tall and ungracious. He had a hard, stern expression even when he wished to please, and when he was out of temper his countenance was truly terrifying, un physiognomique vraiment de repreuve. Such was the view of a courtier. Rupert's friends and inferiors saw him in another light. Beneath the cynical exterior the prince had a kind heart still, his personal followers loved him, the poor blessed him for his charity. The tradespeople remembered with wondering gratitude his just and ready payment of their bills, the sailors looked to him as the seaman's friend, impecunious scholars and inventors sought, not in vain, his aid and countenance. The distressed cavaliers appealed to him in well-founded confidence that they would be heard and helped. In respect of his private life, says Campbell, writing while the memory of the prince still dwelt among the living, he was so just, so beneficent, so courteous, that his memory remained dear to all who knew him. This I say of my own knowledge, having often heard old people in Berkshire speak in raptures of Prince Rupert. Briefwechsel der Herzogin Sophie mit Karl Ludwig von der Pfalz. Sophie to Karl. September 21, 1660. Memorien der Herzogin Sophie, pp. 64-67. Briefwechsel der Herzogin Sophie mit Karl Ludwig. Sophie to Karl, 1660. Ibid, pages 371-3. August 24, 1679. Ibid, September 4, 1679. Ibid, August 15, 1679. Brief der Prinzessin Elisabeth Charlotte von Orleans and die Roggrifinnen. August 7, 1699. Ed. 1843. Strickland. Queens of Scotland, 8. Green's Princesses, 6. Bromley Letters, 20/30 May, 1665. Bromley, October 31, 1661. Bromley, 20/30 May, 1665. Brief der Herzogin Sophie. Dom, State Papers. Chas 2. 103, 40. Rupert to Arlington. October 11, 1644. Brief der Herzogin. Ibid. Ibid, 133. Dom, Entry Book. Record Office, 31. Folios 21. Brief der Herzogin, July 9, 1669. Bromley Letters. Ibid. Briefwechsel der Herzogin mit Karl Ludwig, Karl to Sophie, March 5, 1674. Brief der Herzogin, January 24, 1674. Ibid, February 10, 1678. Ibid, October 28, 1679. Strickland's Elizabeth Stuart. Queens of Scotland, 8. Brief der Herzogin Sophie and die Roggriffin, etc. December 27, 1682. Briefwechsel mit Karl Ludwig, pages 348. 329. February 7, 1679 and June 25, 1678. Brief and die Roggriffin, March 14, 1680. Brief. December 20, 1680. Ibid. Brief and die Roggriffin, December 27, 1682. Strickland. Queens of Scotland, 8. Briefwechsel der Herzogin mit Karl Ludwig. Strickland. Queens of Scotland, 8. Strickland. Queens of England, X. Memoir of Rupert, Preface. Queens of England, X. Renée de la Carouaille, Duchess of Portsmouth. History Mrs. Com Report 9, September 18, 1682. Morrison MSS. Clar. State Papers. Cal, Volume 2, Fall, 1271. Newsletter, July 8, 1653. Bromley Letters, March 22, 1664. Cal, Dom, S., pages 300, 331. Wood's Offense Oxiensis. Edition 1815. Volume 2. Fast II, Campbell 2. 250. Wills from Doctors' Commons. Brief and die Roggriffin, March 12, 1683. Brief and die Roggriffin, Campbell, Volume 2. History Mrs. Com 9. 3. History Mrs. Com Report v. App. I. Sutherland Mrs. August 1686. Autobiography of Sir John Bramston. Camden Society. History Mrs. Com Report 7.b. Verney MSS. Ad. Mrs. 28,898. Fall. 21, Brit. Muse. Since going to press, the author has been shown a document purporting to be the marriage certificate of Prince Rupert and the Lady Francesca Bard. It is dated July 30, 1664, and signed by Henry Bigwell, minister, vicar of Petersham. Cf. Marriage of Geo William Duke of Hanover with Eleanor d'Albros. His children were excluded from succession. Brief der Prinzessin Elizabeth Charlotte, edition Menzel. 1843. Brief der Kurfürstin Sophie and die Roggriffen, March 12, 1680. Brief and die Roggriffen, September 9, 1686. Brief and die Roggriffen. Brief and die Roggriffen, February 11, 1697. Brief and die Roggriffen, October 1, 1704. History Mrs. Com Report 12. App. 3. Mrs. of Earl Cooper, 2. A Jacobite at the Court of Hanover. Ing. History Review. F. F. Chance. Regencies. Record Office. 2, 3. September 12, 1702. Regencies. 3, September 19, 1704. Ad Mrs. 23908. Folios 82. Brit. Muse. Brief and die Roggriffen, August 16, 1708. Hamilton's Memoirs du Comte de Gramont. Edition 1876. Pages 242 to 243. History Mrs. Com Report 12. Rutland Mrs. 2. 17. Briefwechsel MIT Karl Ludwig, July 3, 1674. Briefwechsel MIT Karl Ludwig, July 6, 1679. Brief and die Roggriffen. 4 to 14 December 1696. History Mrs. Com Republic 7.b. Verney MSS. Brief der Kurfürstin Sophie and die Roggriffen, October 26, 1698. Ibid. Regencies. January 4, February 1706. Ibid. 4, May 22, 1708. Hamilton's de Gramont. Edition 1876. History Memoir of Prince Rupert, edition 1683. Preface. Campbell's Admirals, 2. Index. A. Abbott, Mr. Abingdon. Africa, natives of, trade with. Albemarle, Duke of, C. Monk, as Admiral. Aldbourne Chase, Battle of. Allen, Captain. Ambassador, French. Anne of Austria, Queen Regent of France. Anne de Gonzague, Princess Palatine. And Queen, C. York. Antelope, the. Archduke, the see also Leopold. Argan, fleet at. Argyle, Duke of. Arlington, Lord, C. Bennett, Letters of Rupert to. Armentières. Army, New Model. Heiress. Arundel, Lord. Ashburnham, John. Astley, Sir Jacob, afterwards Lord, Letters of, Letters to. Aston, Sir Arthur. Aubigny, Lord, George Stuart. Aylesbury. Azores, the. B. Baden, Margrave of. Bagot, Sir William. Balfour. Ball, Captain. Bampfylde, Colonel. Banbury. Bankert, Admiral. Banner, General. Bard, Francesca, Viscountess Bellamont. Bard, Dudley. Bard, Sir Henry, Viscount Bellamont, letter of, to Rupert. Basing House. Batten, Captain. Bavaria, Duke of, Duchess of. Beaufort, Duc de. Beckman, Captain. Bedford, Earl of. Bedford. Beeston Castle. Bellamont, C. Bard. Belazise, Lord. Bennett, Henry, C. Arlington. Berkeley, Sir John. Birmingham. Blake, Admiral. Bletchington House. Blunt, Sir Charles. Bohemia. Bolton. Boswell, Sir W. Boy, death of. Brandenburg, Elector of. Catherine, Electress of. Breda, Siege of. Brentford, Lord, C. Ruthven. Bristol, Siege of. Bristol, Earl of. Brouncker, Mr. Brunswick, Christian of. Buckingham, George Villiers, 1st Duke of. Letters of Prince Henry to. Death of. Daughter of. Buckingham, 2nd Duke of. Bulstrode, Sir Richard. Bunkley, M. Burnet, Bishop. Burford, Lord. Butler, Colonel. Byron, Sir John, afterwards Lord. Byron, Sir Nicholas. Byron, Sir Robert. C. Cabal, the. Caldecott House, attack on. Calvinist princes. Cambridge, Duke of. Canterbury, Archbishop of. Carlton, Sir Dudley. Carlisle, Lord. Carlisle, Lady. Carnarvon, Lord. Carteret, Sir George. Cartwright, Captain. Casimir, Prince. Casimir, Prince John. Cavaliers, first defeat of. Character of. Distressed. Cave, Sir Richard. Chalgrove Field. Chapelle, M. de la. Charles I. As Prince, as King, letters of. Letters to. Attempts to treat with Parliament, disavows Rupert's action, fears Rupert's violence, in want of money, advances on London, recalls Rupert to Oxford, meets Queen at Edgehill, disturbed councils of. Affection for Duke and Duchess of Richmond, goes to Bristol, at siege of Gloucester, defeated at Newbury, vacillates between parties, desires to send Prince of Wales to West, attempts to prejudice, against Rupert. Successes of, in West, removes Wilmot, desires to reconcile Rupert with Digby, retreats to Oxford, last campaign of, defeated at Naseby, retreats to Wales, refuses to treat, dismisses Rupert, at Newark. Permits Rupert's trial, offended by Rupert's conduct, reconciled with Rupert, goes to Scots, reproaches Charles Lewis, reaction in favor of, attempt of, to escape, death of. Charles II. As Prince, devoted to Rupert, courtship of Mademoiselle, negotiates with Scots, as King, letters to, letters of, quarrel with Rupert. Quarrel with Henrietta, goes to Cologne, Rupert acts for, at Vienna, begs Rupert to remain with him, relations with Rupert, quarrel with James of York, restoration of, care for navy, Rupert complains to. Excuses the French fleet, plot against, mediates between Rupert and Elector, chaplain of. Charles Lewis, Elector Palatine. Letters of, to Elizabeth of Bohemia, to Charles I, to Sir T. Roe, to Rupert. To Sophie. Letters of Princess Sophie to, of Rupert to, of Charles II to. Early life of, comes of age, visit to England, favorite son of Elizabeth, secures aid in England, attempts to recover Palatinate. Desires to send servant to Rupert, prisoner in Paris, goes to England, sides with Parliament, receives money from Parliament, indifference to the King's death, visits Rupert and Maurice, indignant with Edward, supports Philip. Desires reconciliation with brothers, restoration of, neglects Elizabeth, cordial to Rupert, quarrel with Rupert, desires Rupert's return, attempts to injure Rupert, unfortunate marriage of, love for Louise von Degenfeld. Daughter of, anxiety of, for children, death of, children of. Chester, Bishop of. Chichele. Choker, C. de Choker. Churchill, John. Cirencester. Clare, Lord. Clarendon, Lord, C. Hyde, Edward. Opinion of Rupert, opinion of Maurice. Cleveland. Clubmen. Coke. Colbert, opinion of Rupert. Colster, Captain. Condé, Prince of. Constant Reformation, Wreck of. Converton. Conway, Lord. Cook, Captain. Cork, Governor of. Cornish soldiers, zeal of. Cornwallis, Lord. Cortez, Robert. Coddington. Curland, ship from. Court, factions at, courtiers of Charles II. Coventry, Sir William. Crane, Sir Richard. Crawford, Lord. Craven, Lord, generosity of, letters of. Craven, Captain. Crawford, Lord. Crofts, Mrs. Croker, Colonel. Cromwell, Oliver, spies of. Culpeper, Sir John. Curtius, Sir William. D. Dartmouth. Davenant, Sir W. De Choker. Defiance, the. Degenfeld, Louise Vaughan. De Martel, Admiral. De Miraut, Count. Denby, Lord. De Pernon, Duke. De Piny, Count. Derby, Earl of, Countess of. De Rohan, Duke, Madam, Marguerite. De Ruyter, Admiral. Destries, Admiral. Dona, Baron. Digby, George Lord, afterwards Earl of Bristol, character of, enmity to Rupert, challenged by Rupert, reconciled to Rupert, intrigues of, cause of Marston Moor. Cause of Wilmot's fall, letters of, letter to. Digby, Lady. Digby, Sir Kenelm. Dolphin, Edward. Donington Castle. Dorchester. Dorset, Lord. Dover, Treaty of. Downs, Battle of the. Durer, Albert. Dives, Sir Lewis. E. Edgehill, Battle of. Edward, Prince Palatine, marriage of, wife of, letter of. Elizabeth Stuart, Queen of Bohemia, poverty of. Letters of to Sir T. Roe. To Rupert, to Duchess of Richmond, to Vane. Letters of Charles II to, of Charles Lewis to, of Sir T. Roe to. Death of, will of, jewels of. Elizabeth, Princess Palatine. Abbess of Herverdon, letter of. Eliot, Colonel. Emperors, Matthias, Ferdinand II, Ferdinand III, Leopold I. Empire, religious war in. Empress. Ernest Augustus, C. Hanover, Dukes of. Essex, Charles. Essex, Earl of. Evelyn, John, Diary of. Evertson, Admiral. Exeter. Ithan, Lord, C. King. F. Fairfax, Lord, Thomas. Falkland, Lord. Fan, the. Fanshawe, Sir Richard. Fawcett, Captain. Fayal. Ferns, Captain. Fen, Jack. Ferdinand of Styria, C. Emperors. Ference, Count. Feversham, Colonel. Fielding, Colonel. Fines, Nathaniel. Fleet, English. Revolts to the King. Unsatisfactory state of, on Irish coast, in Tagus, on Spanish coast, refits at Toulon, sails for Azores, wrecks, dissension in, damaged by storms, on African coast, voyage to West Indies, return to France. Expedition for Guinea, in First Dutch War, in Second Dutch War, neglected by victuallers, quarrels concerning. Fleet, Dutch, enters Medway, want of union in. Fleet, French. Fourth, Lord. Fox, Captain. Fraser, Lord. Frederick, Elector Palatine, King of Bohemia, letters of. Frederick Henry, Prince Palatine, letters of. G. Gambia, River. Gasson, Marichal. George of Denmark. George William, C. Hanover, Dukes of. Gerard Charles, afterwards Lord. Gerard, Jack. Glemham, Sir T. Gloucester, Siege of. Gonzaga, Marquis de. Goodwin, Ralph. Goring, George, character of, enmity to Rupert. Reconciled to Rupert, letters of. Grafton, Duke of. Grandison, Lord. Greyhound, the. Gwadir, M. de. Guinea. Gustav, Prince Palatine. Gustavus Adolphus, King of Sweden. Gwyn, Nell. H. Haysdonk, Jan von. Hague, Cordat. Hamilton, Anthony, opinion of Rupert. Hamilton, Marquis of. Hampton, John. Hanover, Dukes of, Ernest Augustus, George William, Prince George of. Harman, Captain. Harrow, Don Luis de. Harris. Harrison, Major. Hart, Doctor. Harvey, Doctor. Hastings, Colonel, C. Loughborough, Lord. Hatton, Sir C. Hatzfeldt, Count. Hayes, James. Henderson, Sir J. Henrietta Maria, Queen of England, desires marriage of Charles II, stops Rupert's duel, sides with Rupert, party of at St. Germain's, chaplain of. Henrietta Anne, Duchess of Orleans. Henriette, Princess Palatine. Henry, Duke of Gloucester. Herbert, Sir Edward, letter to. Herbert, Henry Somerset, Lord. Herbert Lord, son of Lord Pembroke. Hertford, Lord, quarrel of with princes. Hesse Castle, Charlotte of, Electress Palatine. Hesse Castle, Landgrave of. Hessen, Guibert. Hayden, Carey. Hohenzollern, Princess of. Holder, Job, letters of. Holland, Lord. Holland, States of. Holmes, Sir J. Holmes, Robert, character of. Honest Seaman, the. Honthorst. Hopkins, William. Hopton, Sir Ralph, afterwards Lord. Howard, Captain. Howard, Henry. Howard, Colonel. Howard, Thomas. Howe, Brigadier General. Hubbard, Sir J. Hughes, Margaret. Hungary, King of. Hyde, Anne, C. York, Duchess of. Hyde, Sir Edward, see also Clarendon. I. Inchiquin, Lord. Independence. Ireton, Henry. Irish soldiers. J. Jacques, Captain. James I, King of England. James II, C. York, Duke of. German, Lord. Jordan, Captain. Juliana, Electress Palatine. K. Karl, Prince Palatine. Karl Ludwig, Raugraf. Kendall, Duke of. Kevenheller, Graf. Killigrew, Henry. King, General, see also Ithan. Kingsmill. Kirk, Mrs. Königsmark, Graf. Kufstein, Graf. Kufstein, Suzanne Marie von. L. La Bassie. Langdale, Sir Marmaduke. Lansdowne, Battle of. La Roche, M. Latham House, Siege of. Laud, Archbishop. Lauderdale, Lord. Lawson, Sir J. Legge, Captain. Legge, Robin. Legge, Colonel William, character of, letters to, letters of, son of. Leicester, Earl of. Leicester, Mayor of. Leipzig, Battle of. Leopold, Archduke. Leslie, David. Leslie, Count. Leslie, Mr. Lou Valiant. Laven, Lord. Leviston, Sir J. Levitt. Lindsay, Lord, 1. Robert Bertie, 2. Montague Bertie. Lip, Colonel. Lyle, George. Liverpool. Long, Mr. Loughborough, Lord, see also Hastings. Louis XIV, King of France. Louise, Princess Palatine, Abbess of Maubuisson, character of. Louise von Degenfeld. Loyal subject, the. Lucas, Charles. Lucas, Lady. Lutheran princes. Lyme, siege of. M. Madagascar. Madeira, governor of. Magdeburg, administrator of. Mainz, elector of. Manchester, lord. Mansfeld, count. Marlborough. Marston Moor, battle of. Martin. Marvel, Andrew. Mary Stuart, Princess of Orange. Massey, Colonel. Matthias, Emperor. Maurice, Prince of Orange, see Orange. Maurice, Prince Palatine, Rect, reported return of, letters of, letter to, character of. May. Mayence, elector of. Mazarine, Cardinal. Meldrum, Sir J. Menace, Sir J. Merchants, English. Mezzotint. Medina, Duke of. Monk, General, see also Albemarle, Duke of. Monmouth, Duke of. Montpensier, Mademoiselle de. Montrose, Marquess of. Moore, Sir J. Morley, Captain. Morris. Mortain, M. Moutre. Mausley, Colonel. Munster, Peace of. Murray, Sir R. Mwen, Captain. N. Naseby, Battle of. Nassau, Ernest, Count of. Navy, Commissioners of. Nevers, Duke of. Newark, Siege of, Scene at. Newbury, Battles of. Newcastle, Marquess of. Nicholas, Sir Edward, Letters of, Letters to. Northampton, Lord. Norton St. Philip's, Battle of. O. Ogle Thomas. O'Neill, Daniel, allied with Digby, Letters of. Optum, Admiral. Orange. Henry Frederick, Prince of. Maurice, Prince of. William, Prince of. William, Prince of. William III, as King, Envoys of. Mary, Princess of. See Mary. Orleans, Duchess of. Elizabeth Charlotte, Henrietta, see Henrietta. Orleans, Duke of. Gaston. Daughter of. See Montpensier. Orleans, Philippe, Duke of. Ormond, Duke of. Letters of. Letters to. Osborne, Colonel. Ossory, Earl of. Oxford, Court at. Parliament at. Siege of. P. Palatinate, the. Parliament, English, negotiates with King, allies with Scots, army of, remonstrates with Rupert, offers pass to Rupert, obliges princes to leave England. Approves conduct of elector, sends ships against the princes. Peace party. Penn, Sir W. Pepys, Samuel, Diary of, as Victualler of Fleet. Percy, Henry, Lord, Letters of, Duel with Rupert. Pett, Robert. Philip, Prince Palatine, kills D'Epinay, enters service of Venice. Piccolomini. Plymouth, Siege of. Poland, Casimir, Prince of. Poland, Ladislas, King of. Popish plot. Porter, Endymion. Portland, Lord. Portodale, Governor of. Portsmouth, Duchess of. Portugal, Ambassador of. Portugal, Infanta of, King of, Queen of, Princes in. Portuguese in the Azores. Powick Bridge, Battle at. Price, Thomas. Purefoy, Mrs. Puritans, in terror of Rupert, hang Irish soldiers, violence of, exultation of, at Marston Moor. Pine, Valentine. R. Radcliffe, Sir George. Ransaw, Marichal. Ratsaville, Prince. Rograffin. Ravenville, Prince. Reading. Reeves, Sir W. Revenge, the. Richelieu, Cardinal. Richmond, Duchess of. Richmond, Duke of, character of, letter of, to Rupert, letter of Rupert to Rivers, Lady Rowe, Sir Thomas, letters of Elizabeth of Bohemia to, of Rupert to, of Sir W. Boswell to. Letters to Elizabeth of Bohemia, to the Elector. Rossiter, Colonel. Roundway Down. Royal Charles, the Royalists. Dissensions in army of, want of discipline among, want of supplies among, factions among, plot of, to surrender Bristol, revenge of, for breach of faith. Royal Prince, the Rographan, the Rupert, Prince Palatine. Letters to, letters of. Letters of, to Arlington, to Charles I, to Charles II, to Legge, to Montrose. To Ormond, to Rowe, to Sophie. Early life of, first visit to England, marriage treaty 357, at siege of Breda, attempt of, on Palatinate, a prisoner of the Empire, rejects overtures of Emperor, release of. Returns to Hague, made general of the horse, voyage to England, opposes treaty, raises supplies. Actions of in 1642, in 1643. Intercedes for Fielding, at Chalgrove Field, besieges Bristol, quarrels with Hertford. Quarrels with Queen, attempt on Aylesbury, created Duke of Cumberland, made President of Wales, opposed by Digby, befriended by German, relieves Newark, recalled to Oxford, wrath of, marches north, fights at Marston Moor. Depression of, made Master of Horse, and Commander-in-Chief, proscribed by Parliament, favours Treaty of Uxbridge, aids Maurice in marches, retaliates for execution of Irish soldiers, last campaign in England, forms peace party. Besieged in Bristol and surrenders, justified by Puritans, indignation of Royalists against, cashiered by King, goes to King at Newark, acquitted by court-martial, violent conduct of, returns to Woodstock, reconciled with King. At siege of Oxford wounded, challenges Southampton, goes to France. Position of in Royalist army, military talent of, tactics of, skilled strategy of, activity of, reputation of, popularity of. Failings of, difficulties of, struggles of, with court, calumnies against. Digby's plot against, at enmity with Digby, challenges Digby, reconciled with Digby. Hatred of Wilmot. Of Goring, of Percy, of Culpeper. Friends of, affection of, for Maurice, visited by Charles Lewis, espouses cause of Philip, accepts command in French army, campaign in Flanders. Courts Mademoiselle for Prince Charles, duels of, takes charge of fleet, difficulties of, conciliates Scots, friend of Montrose, takes fleet to Ireland, hears of King's execution. Made Lord High Admiral, with fleet in Tagus. On Spanish coast, refits at Toulon, voyage of, to Azores, wrecked in, constant reformation, on coast of Africa, loses the Revenge, in West Indies, caught in hurricane, loses Maurice, returns to France. Broken health of. Reception of in Paris, disposes of prize goods, quarrel with Charles II, position of, at St. Germain's, supports James of York, proposes to go to Scotland, acts for Charles II at Vienna, raises forces for Medina. Adheres to Charles II, complicity of, in plot against Cromwell, rumours concerning, inquires into rumour of Maurice's return, demands uppunnage from Elector, in love with Louise von Degenfeld. Quarrels with Elector, vows never to return, lives at Mainz, visit of, to England, popularity in England, visit of, to Vienna, on committee for Tangiers, prepares fleet for Guinea, illness of. Actions of, in First Dutch War, command withdrawn from, holds joint command with Albemarle, complains of naval commissioners, fortifies coast. Quarrels with Arlington, with James of York, dislikes Second Dutch War. Actions of, in Second Dutch War, difficulties of in Second Dutch War, angry with Schomberg and with Destries, rage of, against the French, position of, at court, politics of, care of, for distressed cavaliers. Inventions and trading ventures of, Constable of Windsor, family relations of, urged to return to Palatinate and marry, negotiates marriage for George of Hanover, admiration of, for Duchess of Richmond. Connection with Francesca Bard, connection with Margaret Hughes, death of, will of, character of, courage of, temperance of, chivalry of, confidence and overbearing manners of. Shyness of, faithful to his word, pays debts, declaration of, children of, secretary of, chaplain of, dog of, falcon of, servants of, yacht of, disguises of. Ruperta. Russell, Jack. Ruthven, C. Brentford. S. Saint Germain's, Court at. Saint John. Saint Martinique. Saint Michael. Saint Michel. Sandwich, Lord. Sandys, Colonel. Santa Lucia. Santiago. Saxony, Elector of. Saxe-Weimar, Duke of. Say, Lord, son of. Schomberg, Colonel. Schoneveld, Battle of. Scots, allied with English Parliament, negotiate with Charles II, aversion of to Rupert. Shaftesbury, Lord. Shakespeare, granddaughter of. Shipton, mother. Zegan, Ludwig von. Simmern, Duke of. Scrimshaw, adjutant. Slanning, Nicholas. Slingsby, lieutenant. Sophie, Princess Palatine, Duchess of Hanover, early life of, marriage of. Letters to, opinion of her mother, describes her sisters, children of. Southcote, Sir Edward. Southampton, Lord. Southwold Bay, battles of. Spain, Cardinal Infante of, ambassador of. Speke, Hugh. Spencer, Lord. Spire, Bishop of. Spraggy, Sir Edward. Stadtholder, C. Orange, Princes of. Stafford, Lord. Stapleton, Sir Philip. Stockport. Strickland, Sir Roger. Stuart, Lord Bernard. Sunderland, Lord. Sussex, Lady. Swallow, the. Sweden, King of, C. Gustavus. Symonds, Diary of, Commonplace Book of. T. Taff, Lord. Terrell, Sir Edward. Texel, Battle of the. Tilly, General. Toulon. Transylvania, Prince of. Trevanion, Colonel. Trevor, Arthur, Letters of. Trevor, Sir John. Trevor, Mark. Tromp, Admiral Van. U. Uxbridge, Treaty of. V. Vane, Sir Henry, Letters to. Van Heemskirk. Vavasour, Colonel. Verney, Sir Edmund. Villiers, Lady Mary, C. Richmond, Duchess of. Virgin Islands. Vlotho, Battle of. W. Walker, Sir Edward. Waller, Sir William. Walsh, Sir Robert. Walsingham. War. 30 years, Dutch. Warwick, Lord. Warwick, Sir Philip. Webb, Mr. Wellwang, Captain. Wentworth, Lord. West Indies. Weymouth. Whitebridge, skirmish at. Whitelock, Bulstrode. Wigan. Wilhelmina, Princess Palatine. Willoughby, Lord, C. Lindsay. Willoughby, of Parham, Lord. Willis, Sir Richard. Wilmot, Lord, character of, at enmity with Rupert, arrest and dismissal of. Windibank, Colonel. Windibank, Secretary. Windsor, attack on, Castle of. Wyndham, Colonel. Y. York. Princess and of, Archbishop of, Duchess of. York, James, Duke of, quarrels with Charles II. Supported by Rupert, 282, made Lord High Admiral, quarrels with Rupert, commands fleet, letter of, marriage of, party of, sons of, as king. York, Princess Mary of. York, siege of.